Hello, I'm Russell Haythorn with Denver 7, and welcome to Denver Decides. This community partnership is dedicated to accessible and transparent elections. The partnership includes the League of Women Voters of Denver, Inter-Neighborhood Cooperation, and is presented by Denver 8 TV. Our mission today is to present a ballot issue forum in anticipation of the general election coming up on Tuesday, November 3rd. Among the numerous amendments and ordinance questions on this year's ballot is Referred Measure 2A. This measure is a bill for an ordinance increasing the sales and use tax by a rate of 0.25% and dedicating the revenue derived from the tax rate increase to fund efforts to eliminate greenhouse gases and air pollution and to adapt to climate change. Our format for this debate will follow a basic debate outline with opening and closing statements, cross-examination, and will include responses to questions submitted by the forum organizers. Let's begin by meeting the participants who will present and discuss the pros and cons of Measure 2A. Beginning to my right is Councilman Jolin Clark. He represents District 7 on the Denver City Council, and he will be speaking in favor of Referred Measure 2A. And on my left is Mr. D.K. Williams, a 17-year Denver resident, former state chairman and legislative director of the Libertarian Party of Colorado, and former statewide candidate for office. And Mr. Williams will be speaking against Referred Measure 2A. Welcome to you both.
Thank you. Thank you.
We will begin with 1-minute opening statements from both of our speakers. You can remove your masks. And Councilmember Clark, you are up first with your opening statement.
Well, thank you very much. Good evening, and thanks for the opportunity to be here and to ask all Denver voters to vote yes on 2A. We have a basic responsibility to leave the world a better place for our kids than we found it. But unchecked pollution is harming our health and our children today. Denver cannot wait. We must address climate change now, and we must lead the nation in protecting our land and our air. Low-income communities and people of color are disproportionately harmed by climate change, with higher rates of asthma, more pollution, and homes, streets, and landscapes that are less prepared for the impacts of climate change. Over the life of this fund, Measure 2A would target 50% at a minimum of the revenue that was raised back into these communities with a lens towards equity, race, and social justice. Now is the time to act to protect our air, water, land, and climate. Future generations of Denverites are counting on us. Please vote yes on 2A.
Councilmember, thank you very much for that opening statement. And now, Mr. Williams, it is your turn to deliver your opening statement.
Thank you, and thank you for the opportunity to come and talk about this very important issue. The importance of the environment to this and future generations can't be overstated. I don't think we're going to have a discussion about that whatsoever. That is absolutely true. But this ballot measure puts a tax burden on those least able to afford it and on those who do not contribute to the problem, at least in comparison to the major polluters. It is not the way to address this problem. Sales taxes are the most regressive tax any government can impose. Regressive taxes impact those who can least afford it, including those on a fixed budget where every penny counts. This ballot measure takes pennies from the poor and the oppressed. This is not the way to protect the environment. We should tax the polluters and not the people. We must protect the environment, but asking the poorest and most oppressed among us to bear the burden is not the way to do it. For every $4, it's 1 penny. And that might not be much to us, but when you only have $4, that 1 penny stops you from getting what you cannot get.
Mr. Williams, thank you for that opening statement. And now, gentlemen, you can both offer rebuttals to the other's opening statement. And Mr. Williams, you'll go first with your rebuttal. You have 1 minute.
Again, thank you. And I very much appreciate trying to address this issue, without a doubt. And one of the things that you said, Councilman Clark, and is in the ballot blue book, right? It is true that low-income communities and people of color are disproportionately harmed by climate change, yet aggressive sales taxes like this disproportionately and negative effect and impact those very communities. So while this issue, the environment must be saved and must be protected for our children and our future generations, a sales tax harms the people that we're very much trying to protect. And so there are other more creative ways and more direct ways to address this than a Denver city sales tax. And in addition, what Denver does is going to have no effect on what New Delhi does or the rest of Asia or Europe or the rest of the United States for that matter. So I understand the importance of leadership and symbolism, but this $40 million in income from sales would create a $3.2 million bureaucracy, which is not the answer.
Mr. Williams, thank you for that. And now, Councilman, you have a chance to offer a rebuttal to Mr. Williams' opening.
Thank you very much, and I'm thrilled that today we're in agreement that this is critical work and that we have to protect our environment and address climate change. A couple things. We are a municipal government. We unfortunately do not have access to every taxing, every fundraising mechanism under the sun. We are prohibited by state law, in fact, on most mechanisms. There was a task force that was put together last November, met every single week for over 6 months, and put forward a bold vision for how we as a municipality do our part to address this. And they looked at every single possible way to fund this that is available to local municipal government and came to complete consensus with people from all the different spectrums, all the different industries, all the different sectors to come together and said, this is the best way. In addition, we have exempted food, water, hygiene products from this tax to make it less regressive. And in Denver, as capital city, only 25% of sales tax is paid by Denver residents. The other 75% is paid by visitors and the airline industry.
Councilman, thank you for that rebuttal. Gentlemen, we're now moving on to the cross-examination portion of this debate. We'll have 4 rounds here where you can ask questions of each other. And Council Member Clark, we're starting with you, so you can ask a question of Mr. Williams.
Thank you very much. The Climate Action Task Force that I spoke about just a second ago, put together last year, worked for months, adapted to COVID so that they were meeting virtually because this was so important. And as I mentioned, 26 task force members, the most diverse group of people the city has ever brought together for a task force, grounded their work in equity training at the beginning and race and social justice. They came to unanimous consensus, given all of the options for how to fund this and looking at this through an equity lens, unanimously recommended for us to move forward with this. So given that recommendation of that diverse set, why are you asking Denver voters, instead of listening to these experts who dug deep on every option we had and came forward with the best possible one, that they should ignore that and not vote yes on this?
Mr. Williams.
Thank you. I have absolutely no doubt whatsoever that municipal politicians and municipal employees and people that have their power through the city of Denver want Denver to do something. But every problem in the world cannot be addressed by a municipal organization in the middle of the United States of America. I absolutely have no doubt that people in power want another $3.2 million for a bureaucracy that's going to be largely taken from the people that we're supposed to be trying to help. And you talked about how the airport pays a whole big portion of this. Well, you're admitting it's regressive, but it's not as aggressive as it could be. I understand, because there are exemptions, but it's still regressive. And there are secondary consequences to making airlines pay for this tax, in that the less business at the airport, the fewer Denver residents can have a job. So there are secondary consequences that we must take into account.
Mr. Williams, thank you for that response. And now it's your turn to ask the council member a question.
Just a simple it's kind of a philosophical question. Wouldn't it be more fair to tax the polluters and not the people?
Council member.
Thank you. Thanks for the question. I think we are going to be grappling with this problem for a very long time. We should have taken action a decade ago. In fact, we should have taken action 2 decades ago, and it would have been cheaper to do then had we. But we get quagmired in these discussions about, well, this isn't the right way, instead of we have to take action using the tools that are at our disposal. We do not have a mechanism as local government in Denver to propose a tax the polluters. That the task force looked at these different things. We'll continue to look at that and continue to look at how do we work with our state government and our federal government to take action, to open doors for us to do more. Those options are not on the table right now, and we cannot afford to wait anymore. No tax is perfect, and no one likes to pay more taxes. But chipping in a couple pennies every time we spend $10 into the jar so that we can save this planet for our children is worth every penny that's put in that jar.
Councilman, thank you for that. Moving on with cross-examination, round 2. And Mr. Williams, you'll go first in this round. You have another opportunity to ask the councilman a question.
I understand that municipalities are limited into the things they can do. But even given the things that they can do, wouldn't a property tax, which affects people that own property and not the poorest among us via sales tax, wouldn't that be a better way to raise money for this important issue than a sales tax? Tax people that have more than the people that have less.
Council member.
Thank you very much for the question. And again, we don't get to have a progressive property tax in Denver. We get to have a property tax, and it is not just people who own property who pay property taxes. Anyone who has a roof over their head is paying, whether they pay that directly to the government as homeowners or as renters, they are paying it. So that would affect every single resident of Denver, every single business in Denver would be paying that tax, the entirety. If we're going to raise $40 million, every penny of that is coming from people who live in Denver when we are also in the middle of a housing crisis, when we are struggling to have affordable options for people. So a property tax is another option that Denver has. We do not have a progressive property tax that says, hey, these people who make this much pay a higher level of property tax. So there isn't a progressive option there either, and that burden would be on every single resident. By going to a sales tax, we capitalize on all of the visitors, all the people who come to our great city and spend their dollars to be able to offset some of the burden on our residents.
Councilman Clark, thank you for that. We'll stick with you, and you can ask Mr. Williams another question here in round 2 of cross-examination.
Thank you. The United Nations Intergovernmental Panel on Climate Change released a report in 2018 that warned that there were, at that point, only 12 years for us to take action to curb global warming, to keep the maximum rise in global temperature to 1.5 degrees Celsius, beyond which even a half of a degree will significantly worsen the risk of drought, flood, extreme heat, and poverty for hundreds of millions of people across the globe. The authors of the report say that urgent and unprecedented changes are needed to reach these targets and goals. Those actions, those tailpipes, those buildings that are polluting are in our cities. Cities have to take action or we will fail, and all of this will happen. That's why the task force brought forward this recommendation as the first step that Denver needs to do in our part in a global problem. If we're not going to levy, or if voters are being encouraged to vote no, how do you propose that we meet? This is what the scientists globally have told us we have to meet.
Council member, thanks for the question. Mr. Williams.
I know it can be very frustrating to not have the power to address problems that we see. The city government doesn't have the power to make any meaningful difference here other than symbolic. And a $40 million tax on the people of Denver, notwithstanding that some people come in and pay it as well, it's still people in line outside the Walgreens on Broadway that are counting out their change still have to pay this. Yes, there are exemptions, but they still have to pay it. And sometimes we see a problem and the answer is in somebody else's power. Maybe the United Nations, maybe the United States, maybe the European Union, maybe Asia. But just because we see a problem doesn't mean we need to do something counterproductive in hurting the people of this city that makes them cost more, makes the poor people pay more. The problem is out there. That doesn't mean Denver has any role in making it any better and can make it worse.
Mr. Williams, thanks for that response. Moving on, cross-examination round 3. You have another opportunity to ask a question here first, Councilman.
We're not doing rebuttals of the question? Did I miss that?
You can offer a rebuttal when he asks his next question.
Okay, thank you. So I just asked that question. I'm asking a second one?
You're asking another question.
Okay.
You're first in round 3.
Got it. All right,
Yes.
thanks. In addition to this global mandate from scientists about what we must do, climate change is a serious threat to our economy and our way of life right here in Colorado. As we've seen with increasing wildfires this year, flooding, drought, decreasing snow in our mountains, and all of the industries that our citizens rely on for jobs and our economy in the mountains. All of those and our very lives are at risk. Poor air quality and the extreme heat impacts public health, especially for our most vulnerable populations. Our kids who were already inside because of COVID are now being told they can't go outside safely to do anything because of the smoke from the impacts from climate change right here in our city. So how do you propose, without using the tools at our disposal right here where we have to make a difference, that we solve these problems for our citizens here in Colorado?
Councilman, thank you. Mr. Williams.
I accept admitting there's limits to what a city can do. The smoke you're mentioning is not coming from Denver. The smoke you are mentioning is coming from even other states. And nothing the city of Denver can do in taxing people that count out their change is going to stop that smoke from another state coming in here. It's not going to stop whatever India does, or Asia in general, or Europe. It's not going to stop that. So I appreciate the passion that you see these problems, but sometimes one organization does not have the power to do anything to it. And raising taxes on the most poor and the most oppressed, the people we're trying to help, is not the way to do it. Sometimes the tools you have aren't going to make a difference. And spending the money on it is not a prudent use of people's taxes, and especially the most oppressed and downtrodden in this city.
Mr. Williams, thanks for that response. And now it's your turn to ask the councilman another question. And councilman, this is when you can offer your rebuttal.
Thank you.
Yes.
Well, just simply, how does the city of Denver's actions have any appreciable effect on the rest of the entire world and the global nature of this problem?
And I'm glad that you asked me that question. That was
Good.
what I was looking for with the rebuttal, so I appreciate that.
Good.
I think that you're missing the point, respectfully, entirely. The only way that we solve this problem, the only action that is possible, is at the local level. It is a global problem, and it is one global ecosystem, which means that any reduction in emissions here at home, literally in my house, and how what kind of washer and dryer I pick, what kind of car, those emissions are part of this global system, this global ecosystem. That is the action. Every single one of us has the power to fix this problem, and it is right here at home. This is not something that global leadership is going to fix. This is not something that federal leadership is going to fix. The only people who can fix this is us here locally. We have to take action, and we have to lead to show all the other cities how they can take action, so collectively we can solve this problem.
Gentlemen, thank you for that. That brings us to the end of round 3 of cross-examination. We have one more round of cross-examination, which means you both can ask one question of the other. Keep your question short. We're running short on time. Keep your question short. You'll have 1 minute to respond. And I'm sorry, Mr. Williams, we're starting with you.
All right, I think we've covered most of the area here that we can cover, but I guess I'll just go back to the question of, would it not, at least, even if we can't do it, wouldn't it be more socially just to tax the polluters and not the people who want to buy a sandwich at McDonald's?
Asking questions about wouldn't it be nice if we could do something that we can't do does nothing but lead to more inaction. And that is the one thing that we absolutely cannot afford. I might wish upon a star or upon something that doesn't exist to solve my problem. If that isn't something that's going to happen, and that's something that can't happen, then that is as bad as choosing not to take action. We have to take action, and we have to do that within the world of reality, within the world of things that we control and we can do. 2A presents for Denver voters something that is real, something that we can do, and something that is the best given the tools that we have, the absolute best option, and it will create change if they choose it.
Council member, thank you for that. You have one final opportunity to ask Mr. Williams a question. Please keep it short.
Thank you. Obviously, you've shown a lot of concern about the cost of this, and I appreciate that. You keep talking about the cost of those pennies today. Experts have said that the cost of inaction, if we do nothing or we fail to take action, that will cost 20 to 30 times more, $20 billion that it will cost to not act. So a couple pennies today or $20 down the road. So please, for me, walk me through why it's better to not spend money now, to spend a whole lot more money later dealing with the impacts of
Mr.
climate
Williams.
change.
Absolutely. The people that should be paying this are the polluters. That's the people that should be paying for it. So that's the answer to your question. You talk about tools, and we have to use the tools that we have. If I need to drive a nail and my tool is a sponge, I'm wasting my time. That's the only tool I have, but it's not going to be effective. If the water is rising, I can drive to the Atlantic Ocean and take a cup of water out. And that's a tiny bit. And you're talking about how a tiny bit matters. And it does. But there are costs. There are costs to driving there. There are costs to taking that water out. And the appreciable difference and appreciability is so important here. What is important? What is going to make a difference? And symbolism, which is what this largely is going to take $40 million, give it to a government agency, and create another $3.2 million bureaucracy that will do more for the people making a salary than it will for the climate.
Gentlemen, thank you both for that cross-examination. Very robust, very respectful conversation here. Moving on to the card questions submitted by the forum organizers. And we'll start with you, Councilman. And I believe you alluded to this earlier in the debate. You talk about action and inaction. Police, fire, roads, bridges, and libraries are some of the areas that have been cut due to COVID. Is the success of 2A dependent on other countries like China doing their part to curb climate change?
The success of, I think there are two questions in there. This proposal is a dedicated source of revenue specifically for this issue. This does not provide any cuts to any other services. This does not affect the budget. That is, the power of this is we Denver voters have a choice to say this is money for climate change, for addressing this issue and this issue alone. And it's not general fund dollars that could be spent on one thing the next year and a different thing the other year. This will be spent on what voters have. 2A is critical to us solving this globally. If there's one thing that we can be sure of, it's that if Denver does not take action, the globe cannot solve climate change. That is what we're sure of. We have to take action. If we don't do our part, this problem is unsolvable. We will need collaboration from other countries that are doing much better than we are, given our federal leadership right now. But the thing that we know for sure is if we don't do it, if we don't take action, then it is unsolvable, and we have to take action now to do our part.
Councilman, thank you for that. Mr. Williams, same question on the cuts to services and China's responsibility in all of this. Please.
Well, China, among many other parts of the world, definitely have a major responsibility into the entire globe's environment. And I guess my point, I'm just trying to come back to this, is Denver can bang their head on the wall about it, and they can raise $40 million, and then they can create a $3.2 million bureaucracy and add to it at a municipal level, but they're not going to have anything to do with the rest of the world. They have nothing to do with China and Asia. And like I've said, I mean, it's trying to empty the ocean with a teaspoon. And it's important to you mentioned what's reality, what we can actually do. And part of that is accepting when you can't do anything except raise money and take sales tax from people that can't afford it, but fund a $3.2 million bureaucracy. That's the reality. That's what will happen. That will have far more effect than any teaspoons coming out of the ocean when China isn't doing a thing.
Mr. Williams, continuing with that, this is on the tax increase now. According to an article September 25th in the Denver Post, about 42.1% of Colorado residents surveyed had borrowed money the past 7 days to meet immediate expenses. Is now the right time for a tax increase?
I think you know my answer to that one. No, it's not. It is not. And with this ballot measure 2A for global warming that Denver is going to help solve, a tiny city of 500 million, or the state of 5 million people, and we're only part of that, is going to solve, which it's not. If we take the 2B as well, another 0.25% of the sales tax. Now we're talking about a penny for every $2. And so it is not the time to be raising taxes on government programs that are going to have no appreciable effect. I understand wanting to do something. I also understand wanting to do something that's not going to cost money to do nothing or to have negligible effect. So no, it's not the time for this tax increase.
Mr. Williams, thank you. Councilman, on the question of a tax increase right now and this issue of, families struggling to make ends meet, is it the right time for this?
There's never a perfect time to go after a tax increase. But right now is the critical time. We have to take action now on climate. And we have seen through the COVID-19 crisis, we've seen firsthand the impact that this has on our frontline communities. And if we don't take action now, this is the tip of the iceberg. That penny spent today saves all of those families dollars and dollars and dollars and when the next crisis is here, and they will come faster because of the impacts of climate change. We have to take action now. It's never a great time, and nobody loves a new tax, but this is the right time. We should have done this before. We cannot afford to wait another year, another week, another day. We have to take action now, and that action right now, today, while it does cost a little bit now, will save everyone, especially those who are hardest hit, money every single day following.
Gentlemen, thank you very much for taking those questions. We're moving on now to closing statements, and we appreciate you both being here tonight. And that brings us to the end of our Q&A, and each speaker will have 1 minute for a closing statement. And we will reverse the order of the opening statements, so that means, Mr. Williams, you'll go first with your closing statement.
Thank you very much. The environment must be protected. Absolutely. It is crucial for the environment to be protected. But a regressive sales tax in this medium-sized city in the middle of the United States is not the way to do it. We can bang on a nail with a sponge. It takes effort and it takes money, and it's not doing anything. Global climate is a global issue. What Denver does has no effect on the rest of the world's polluters. But we can keep hammering that nail with that sponge if we want. We can keep taking money from the most oppressed and most poor and keep banging on that nail with the sponge. And it might make us feel good, but it's not doing anything, but it's taking money. And it's funding a $3.2 million municipal bureaucracy. A regressive sales tax that disproportionately and negatively affects the poorest and most oppressed among us is not the answer to a global problem. So again, I just submit for your consideration that a no vote on 2A is the socially just vote.
Mr. Williams, thanks for that closing. And now, Councilman, it's your turn to deliver your closing.
Thank you very much. This is absolutely not symbolic, and this is not creating bureaucracy. This is creating action now. Action now for those who are most vulnerable. This tax, like no other tax that has ever come before it, has committed to spending over 50% of those dollars right back into frontline communities who will be paying much less than that. We are putting dollars into those communities to help build resiliency and to help make sure that what is coming down the pipe is manageable and that we can get ahead of this. With environmental movements, we're often told that we need to think globally and act locally. This is a perfect example because every single decision that we make, every single penny that we spend from this fund to reduce carbon emissions has a direct impact on this global issue. In fact, this is the only action that can solve this problem, and we have to take action now. We cannot afford to wait. Please vote yes on 2A. You can learn more at yeson2a.com.
Gentlemen, thank you both for that. It was a great debate. Way to go.
Thank you.
You were both great. You were both respectful, and we appreciate that. The viewer was well served at home. And on behalf of the forum organizers, I'd like to, again, thank you both. We hope that we have given you a fair look at the pros and cons on Referred Measure 2A. Again, this measure is a bill for an ordinance increasing the sales and use tax by a rate of 0.25% and dedicating the revenue derived from the tax rate increase to fund efforts to eliminate greenhouse gases and air pollution and to adapt to climate change. Our thanks also to the Denver Decides partners, which include Inter-Neighborhood Cooperation and the League of Women Voters of Denver. Denver Decides is presented by Denver 8 TV. Remember, Election Day is Tuesday, November 3rd. Let your voice be heard. Be sure you're registered and get out there and vote. For complete election information online, go to denverdecides.org. I'm Russell Haythorn with Denver 7. Thank you for joining us.